The Galactic Council chamber floated at the heart of the capital world like a jewel of glass and gold, its spires glimmering under the light of 3 suns. Inside that enormous dome sat the rulers of 1,000 species, their voices rising in cold arrogance as they debated which empire to tax next, which border to expand, which weaker race to punish. Among them, a few elder species spoke of the ancient wars and the lost worlds that once burned bright and then vanished into darkness, but their warnings were drowned by laughter. The council had become proud, too proud, blind to history. For many years they had ruled the galaxy with a calm certainty that nothing could challenge them again, and at the center of their pride was a story they told their children, the story of the humans. To them, humanity was a warning, a legend of madness and defiance. 2 centuries ago, when the council tried to bring Earth into its order, the humans had refused, choosing to fight even when outnumbered 1,000 to 1. The war had been swift and cruel. Entire cities on Earth were turned to ash. The council recorded the fall of humanity as a victory and erased their name from all star maps. Since then, the galaxy had been silent about them, and the council liked it that way. But silence has weight, and in that silence something had changed. Beyond the borders of known space, where old navigation routes ended and no patrol dared to travel, strange signals began to hum through the void. At first it was only static, meaningless distortions, but soon it became patterns. Short pulses, then long ones, repeating like a heartbeat. The first to notice were not the admirals or the scientists, but the merchants and miners who worked near the edge of the spiral arm. They whispered about ghost lights following their ships, shadows that moved against starlight and wreckage appearing where no battle had been fought. When the reports reached the council, they dismissed them. The frontier was full of pirates, they said. Superstitions, nothing more. Weeks later, an entire border station went dark. The outpost at Rhinar Gate was manned by 40,000 beings from 7 worlds, protected by 3 destroyers, surrounded by constant traffic. In one moment it was alive, filled with laughter and trade, and in the next it was gone. No distress call, no explosion, just silence. The council sent an investigation team, but when the ships reached the coordinates, they found nothing. No debris, no signal, not even dust. It was as if the entire station had been erased from existence. The admirals blamed a black hole anomaly, the scientists argued. The council recorded it as an unfortunate event and continued their debates. Then the disappearances grew. Patrol routes near the Karth Dominion reported strange sensor readings, energy bursts so massive they bent navigation arrays. One fleet sent a visual transmission before contact was lost. The feed showed the stars above them twisting, folding into themselves, and then the screen turned white. All that remained was static and a faint echo, like distant thunder. The council dismissed it again, but unease spread among the lower ranks. Border worlds began to evacuate civilians. Traders abandoned routes that had been safe for centuries. The word Terrans was spoken only in secret. In the shadow of the capital, old scholars gathered in hidden rooms whispering about the possibility that humanity had survived. Records from the war were incomplete, heavily censored. The council archives showed Earth as destroyed, yet deep files referenced an evacuation fleet, millions who vanished before the bombardment began. Where they went, no one knew. Some believed they had fled to uncharted space, others that they were wiped out by their own weapons. But one scholar, an ancient Val named Terran, wrote a message to the council. If they still live, they remember. The council ignored it. On the morning of the 3rd cycle of high sun, the capital awoke to an emergency broadcast from the Karth Dominion. Their frontier systems had gone silent. Entire communication chains were gone. The Dominion's prime minister, a massive reptilian creature named Sovrath, appeared before the council via hologram, trembling with rage. He accused the other empires of sabotage. No one touches our space without consequence, he roared. The council voted to send aid, though most delegates did so only to keep peace. Hours later, as their ships prepared to leave, a new transmission arrived, from the same region. It was faint, heavily distorted, but it carried a code that no alien species had used in over 200 years. It was human. The signal repeated a short phrase in Galactic Standard. We warned you never to come back. Panic rippled through the chamber. Translators checked the message again, confirming the origin. The frequency came from deep within the lost zones, from coordinates that once marked the human colonies. The Council demanded clarity, but none came. Within days, every network across the galaxy buzzed with rumors. Was it a prank? A ghost signal? Or proof that humanity had survived? The leaders refused to believe it. They called it digital interference. Yet the soldiers at the front began to see things, the outline of ships in the dark, unmarked vessels gliding between asteroid fields, energy spikes that vanished when scanned. The fear was spreading faster than the truth. Admiral Krell of the Dominion ordered his entire Second Fleet, 2,000 ships, to investigate the region, known as the Black Veil. The fleet was equipped with the most advanced sensors, armed with plasma torpedoes protected by quantum shields. They disappeared 3 hours after entering the zone. Their last message was one word: contact. Back on the capital world, the council chamber grew quiet for the first time in generations. Holograms of lost fleets hovered over the central table, blinking red. The younger species demanded war preparations. The elders argued for diplomacy, though none knew who to contact. Reports kept arriving, space stations shredded from within, planetary relays destroyed by unknown weapons, refugee ships appearing out of nowhere carrying survivors who spoke of black silhouettes tearing through the stars. They didn't attack us, one trembling captain told the council guards before dying of radiation burns. They erased us. The panic reached the civilian worlds. Markets crashed, colonies sealed their borders, and across the galaxy, old monuments to the great victory over humanity were quietly dismantled. No one wanted to draw attention to the past. Governments burned their war records, terrified that someone or something was reading them. Meanwhile, in the darkness beyond the rim, the stars flickered like dying embers. There, among drifting wrecks and forgotten colonies, a fleet unlike any other moved in silence. Its hulls were black as night, its engines leaving no trace. On their bows, faintly glowing under layers of armor, were symbols no alien could mistake. The old Terran flag, blue and white, a planet encircled by stars. Inside one of those ships, a man stood at a viewport, staring at the galaxy he once called home. His name was Commander Elias Ward, the last surviving officer of the old Earth Navy. Around him, the crew worked with quiet precision, their eyes hardened by generations of exile. They had watched the galaxy grow fat and arrogant. They had seen the Council enslave weaker races, strip worlds of resources, and erase history. Humanity had built its hidden empire in the shadows far beyond the reach of alien eyes. For centuries they rebuilt, creating ships of impossible design, weapons that could fold gravity and light. They did not seek revenge at first. They only wanted safety. But when the first alien fleets began expanding again into their forgotten territories, the decision was made. Humanity would not beg for peace. They would remind the galaxy why they were once feared. Commander Ward raised his hand and the main screen lit up with hundreds of red marks: Council patrols, Dominion fleets, trade convoys. Operation Dawnfire begins, he said softly. His words carried through the fleet, calm and final. Across thousands of hidden warships, the same command echoed. Engines ignited without sound. Light bent. Space itself shivered. Back in the Karth Dominion, citizens looked up to see the night sky turning white. Every ship in orbit began to fail simultaneously, power dying as if drained by invisible hands. The ground shook. Observatories recorded energy spikes higher than any supernova, and then in the blink of an eye the stars vanished. When the light returned, the Dominion's fleet was gone. No explosion, no survivors, just empty space. The event was visible from half the galaxy. Panic erupted everywhere. Worlds across the spiral arm went on lockdown. Council emergency meetings were held around the clock. Theories flooded the data channels. Wormholes, black hole weapons, even divine punishment. But when investigators scanned the wreckage fields days later, they found something that made every heart freeze. Fragments of alloy identified as Terran make, the kind used in pre-war human ships. That discovery silenced even the proudest species. In a secure chamber deep beneath the council palace, the highest leaders, the room erupted in chaos. Admirals demanded fleets. Politicians screamed for negotiations. But there was no one to contact. The humans did not answer hails. They sent no demands, no threats, only silence. Silence heavier than any declaration of war. Days passed. Then one by one, the Council's border defense networks began to fail. Satellites blinked offline. Long-range weapons turned on their own power cores. When the technicians tried to shut them down, they found their systems already overridden by an unknown protocol, Terran code. The realization came too late. Across hundreds of systems, orbital guns fired in unison, destroying shipyards and command centers. The Council's greatest fleets were crippled before they could even launch. On the capital world, alarms screamed through the skies. Citizens rushed to shelters. The Council's elite guard surrounded the central chamber, weapons raised toward the heavens. For hours, nothing happened. Then, through the storm of broken communications, a single transmission cut through every frequency. It was an old Earth voice, calm and steady, speaking in the same galactic tongue that once echoed in those halls. "For centuries you called us monsters," the voice said. "But monsters are made, not born. You broke the treaty, you burned our world, and now you will understand what silence truly means." The broadcast ended. No signature, no trace. Just those words, repeated across every communication line in the galaxy. The panic became hysteria. Some worlds tried to surrender without being attacked. Others fled to uninhabited sectors, believing they could hide. The Council itself fractured, empires blaming each other for awakening the humans' wrath. But the truth was clear to everyone. The galaxy had struck first 2 centuries ago. Humanity was only answering. On the outskirts of the spiral arm, Commander Ward stood again before the viewport, watching the data scroll across the display. The first phase was complete. The enemy's outer fleets were destroyed, their networks crippled, their confidence broken. He thought of Earth, now green again, oceans restored, cities rebuilt under domes of silver and glass. Humanity had risen from ashes not to conquer, but to remind the stars that survival had a cost. He whispered softly, as if speaking to ghosts. "This is not vengeance. This is memory." The ship's engines hummed, the fleet turned toward the next sector, and space itself bent to their will. Back in the council chamber, the leaders sat frozen in their golden seats, staring at the dark screen where the last transmission had played. No one spoke. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy's rulers felt fear, not of destruction, but of the realization that they had never truly won that ancient war. Somewhere out there in the endless dark, humanity had waited, watched, and prepared, and now the silence they once mocked had become the loudest sound in the universe. After the disappearance of the Karth Dominion fleet, the galaxy trembled in silence. It wasn't just the loss of ships, it was the loss of certainty, of the arrogance that had ruled for centuries. The Council called it a navigational accident, but no one believed that lie. Across 1,000 worlds, soldiers whispered that the humans had returned, and even the most powerful empires felt the cold hand of fear settle over their hearts. The Council ordered every major civilization to prepare a defense grid, to recall all ships from the frontier. But deep down they all knew, defense meant nothing if they were fighting ghosts. On the outer stations, engineers worked day and night to boost long-range sensors. Merchant convoys traveled in silence, their lights dimmed, afraid that something was watching them from the dark. The old legends that once made children laugh were now spoken again in secret. Stories of the Terrans, the Death Worlders who walked through fire and never yielded, the species that turned every defeat into a lesson, every loss into a weapon. In the cold region known as the Marne Expanse, the Second Coalition Fleet was gathering. It was the largest armada assembled since the ancient wars, over 4,000 ships drawn from 10 empires. Their combined firepower could burn entire planets to glass. Admiral Threx of the Dravik Confederacy stood at the command deck, his scales trembling under the red glow of the alert lights. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in numbers and tactics and strength. Yet even he could not shake the unease that filled the crew. Reports kept coming in from the edge. Faint energy spikes, unregistered signals, whispers through the radio bands that seemed almost like breathing. "It's interference," he muttered, but no one answered. The bridge officers watched their scanners, eyes wide, afraid to blink. Then it began. A light flickered on the edge of the display. 1, then 2, then dozens. Unknown contacts, no transponder codes, no thermal signatures. The fleet moved into defensive formation. Threx gave the order to hail them, but before the signal left the ship, all communication channels went dead. The bridge lights dimmed. Systems flickered. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. Then from the darkness ahead, the stars themselves began to move. They weren't stars. They were ships. Thousands of them, black, silent, smooth as glass, each one larger than a city. No weapons fired. No words were spoken. The human fleet simply drifted forward, an ocean of shadow swallowing the light. Admiral Threx tried to speak, but his voice broke. The tactical display filled with warnings. Energy readings off the charts. Gravitational distortions forming around every Terran vessel. "They're charging weapons," someone screamed. But the scanners showed no heat, no movement, only the slow hum of space bending. Then came the flash, not of light, but of absence. The sensors screamed and died. The ships vanished from all readings, and in that instant the fleet systems turned against them. Engines stalled, shields collapsed, reactors overloaded. Every ship was crippled without a shot being fired. The flagship's glass dome cracked, and Threx looked up just in time to see something impossible. A small human craft, barely larger than a fighter, hovering outside his viewport. Through the glass, he saw a figure inside, human, face calm, eyes steady, watching him. Then, without sound or fire, everything went white. When the Council received the transmission hours later, it was incomplete, static-filled, almost unreadable. The final frames showed Admiral Threx's face frozen in shock, the human craft reflecting the light of his dying bridge. That was all. The greatest fleet in the galaxy had ceased to exist in less than 5 minutes. Every government went into lockdown. The Council ordered an emergency blackout on all public networks to prevent panic, but fear spread faster than they could silence it. Across the colonies, citizens refused to travel, captains refused to sail, and soldiers began to pray to gods long forgotten. In the deep void, far from the chaos, the Terran fleet moved silently through the wreckage. Inside the command ship, Erebus Commander Elias Ward watched the aftermath with cold, tired eyes. Around him, his officers worked without emotion. They had not cheered. There was no joy, no satisfaction, only grim silence. They had trained for this moment their entire lives, but none of them expected it to feel like this. Ward turned to his second-in-command, a woman named Mara Vance, whose face was pale in the dim light. "Any survivors?" he asked. She shook her head. "None, sir. Their distress calls were intercepted and neutralized. No one saw what happened." He nodded slowly. "Then it begins." He walked to the observation deck where the shattered hulks of alien warships floated like broken bones. Through the glass he could see their insignias, symbols of power, of the empires that had once burned his world. He remembered the stories told to him as a child, how Earth's skies had turned to fire, how the oceans boiled, how millions vanished in a single day. The Council had promised peace after the purges, but peace built on graves was never peace at all. Humanity had endured because it had to. It had survived not through mercy, but through memory. Ward placed his hand on the cold glass and whispered, "We warned you." Back on the capital world, the Council met in panic. The chamber that once echoed with arrogance now trembled with fear. Holograms of the destroyed fleet flickered above the table, showing drifting wreckage and radiation fields. "This is impossible," shouted one delegate. "They use technology we cannot detect. They are manipulating gravity itself," another cried. The Chancellor of the Council, an ancient being named Solrath, struggled to keep order. "We must remain calm," he said, his voice shaking. "Perhaps this is an internal rebellion among our fleets. Perhaps," but he stopped when the lights flickered again. Every screen in the chamber went black. Then a new image appeared, a human face covered by a helmet, eyes like fire. The voice that followed was calm, measured, without anger. "You erased us from your history," it said. "But history remembers. We gave you warnings. You took our silence for weakness. That was your mistake." The message ended, leaving nothing but static. Solrath collapsed into his chair. Around him, the delegates shouted in terror, "They can access our network, our defense grid." One by one, reports came in. Outposts offline, relay stations destroyed, ships refusing to respond. The humans were not just attacking from the outside. They were inside already. Somehow, somewhere, they had infiltrated the systems of the galaxy long before the first strike. While the Council drowned in panic, smaller empires began to turn on each other. The Karth accused the Dravik of secretly harboring human agents. The Zathari blamed the trade union for selling Terran tech. Chaos spread, alliances broke overnight, and through it all the humans remained silent. No fleet appeared on radar, No planet was invaded. Only destruction followed wherever their shadow passed. In the ruins of the Marne expanse, automated beacons continued to send weak, broken signals. A rescue team from the neutral world of Thesa was dispatched to search for survivors. They found none. What they found instead was worse. Pieces of hull metal fused into shapes no science could explain. Molecular bonds rewritten. Time distortion within the wreckage. One drone recorded a strange phenomenon, the sound of a heartbeat echoing through the debris. When the recording was played back, it revealed something even more chilling. The heartbeat matched human rhythm. The scientists who analyzed it refused to speak. One took his own life the next morning, leaving a single note. They are not what they were. Commander Ward stood in silence as his fleet moved toward the next sector. The humans had evolved beyond their enemies' understanding. Their technology, born from desperation and exile, had fused biology and machine, thought and matter. They could fold space, manipulate energy, and erase signals from existence. Yet for all their power, Ward knew the cost. They had lost their innocence, their laughter, their softness. What remained was purpose, cold, precise, unstoppable. Humanity had become what the galaxy had forced it to become, a storm wrapped in silence. Inside the Council's war room, the last transmission from the rescue team played on loop. The delegates watched as the video ended in static, the faint sound of a human voice whispering, "Don't come back." None of them spoke. The Chancellor finally broke the silence, whispering to no one in particular, "We should have left them alone." That night, across the galaxy, every major world dimmed its lights. Fleets were recalled, stations locked down, and entire sectors abandoned. The galaxy that once mocked humanity now prayed they would stop. But deep in the black, the Terran fleet did not stop. They moved like shadows across the stars, silent, patient, unstoppable. The Council's fear had only begun, and the galaxy finally understood why the old legends had always said one thing: never provoke the species that learned to survive extinction. The Council chamber once stood as the proud heart of galactic order, a place where thousands of voices echoed with authority and confidence. Now it was a hall of trembling silence. The golden walls that once shone with power felt cold, the air thick with fear. Delegates from every empire sat in tense stillness, their eyes fixed on the central projection, the recorded destruction of the Coalition fleet, the ghostly remains of Admiral Threx's armada, drifting through the void like a graveyard of light. The image played again and again, but none could explain it. No weapons, no heat, no explosion, just erasure. It was as if space itself had devoured them. The younger species screamed for retaliation, demanding vengeance, but the elders only lowered their heads. They had seen this before. Centuries ago, when humanity had stood defiant against the galaxy, they had seen the same silence before the storm. Chancellor Solrath, leader of the Council, stood tall but shaken. His voice, once a roar that could command worlds, now cracked under the weight of uncertainty. "We will not surrender to fear," he declared. "The Terrans are gone. These are tricks, old human technology rediscovered by scavengers. We must remain rational." His words echoed through the chamber, empty and hollow, a desperate attempt to cover the truth that every mind already knew. The humans were not gone. They were here, watching, waiting. An aide stepped forward, pale and trembling, clutching a datapad. "Chancellor, there's something else. The signal that destroyed the Coalition fleet, it was not random. It carried a pattern." Solrath frowned. "What pattern?" The aide hesitated before speaking. It was the old Terran distress code, the same one they used during the final war." The room erupted. Delegates shouted over one another, voices trembling with panic. "Impossible. You mean they used their distress signal as a weapon? How can code destroy ships?" Solrath slammed his clawed hand on the podium. "Enough," he shouted. "Humans cannot destroy our fleets with messages. This is sabotage, a virus planted by traitors." But even as he spoke, the chamber lights flickered again. The giant holographic map of the galaxy shimmered, then shifted on its own. Red lights began to appear, one after another, each marking a destroyed station, a missing convoy, or a silent outpost. The pattern spread like fire. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Within minutes, nearly 1/4 of the galactic frontier was marked in red. No communication. No survivors. No explanation. The council guards raised their weapons in fear as if bullets could stop ghosts. Panic spread. Some delegates fled the chamber, shouting that the humans had cursed the very stars. Others demanded immediate surrender. But Solrath refused to believe it. Denial became his shield against the truth. "We are the council," he hissed. "We control half the galaxy. We do not bow to myths." Far across space on the Terran flagship Erebus, Commander Ward watched their chaos unfold through stolen transmissions. He stood silent among his officers, eyes reflecting the glow of the council feed. "They still don't understand," said Mara Vance quietly, her voice filled with sorrow more than pride. Ward nodded. "They never did. They thought dominance was peace. They thought silence meant defeat." His hand tightened behind his back. "Let them talk. Their fear will destroy them faster than we ever could." Back on the capital world, denial turned to paranoia. The council ordered mass purges within its own military ranks, accusing officers of collaboration with humans. Thousands were executed, thousands more fled. The chaos they feared was no longer coming. It was already here. Worlds that had stood united for centuries now closed their borders. The Karth Dominion pulled its fleets from joint command. The Zathari Empire withdrew all trade ships and fortified its planets. Even the mighty Tharn Confederacy sealed its space gates and cut all transmissions. What had been a single united galaxy became a crumbling mosaic of frightened nations. Inside the council chamber, Solrath stood alone, staring at the empty seats where the other empires once sat. His aide returned, trembling. "Sir, the communication blackout is failing. The humans are broadcasting something." Solrath turned sharply. "On all channels?" "Yes, sir." "Every system." The screens flickered again. Static filled the air, then an image appeared on the Earth, blue and whole, floating among stars. It was not destroyed. It was beautiful. For centuries, the Council had told its citizens that Earth was a dead world, burned to ash. But now it appeared alive, glowing with oceans and forests, and then a voice came, calm and steady, speaking in perfect galactic standard. "This message is not war," the voice said. "This is remembrance. You believed our silence meant surrender. You erased our name, our history, our children. You built monuments over our graves. But we do not forget. We watched you enslave others, strip worlds bare, repeat the same crimes you once committed against us. You learned nothing, so we return not for conquest but for balance. The age of arrogance ends tonight." The transmission cut off. The chamber was silent. Every delegate sat frozen, unable to breathe. Solrath sank into his chair, his strength gone. He whispered to himself. "They rebuilt Earth, they rebuilt everything." His aide swallowed hard. "Sir, there's something else. The transmission came from inside our territory, less than 1 light year from the capital." Solrath looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Inside?" The aide nodded. "They are already here." Moments later, alarms screamed across the city. The sky darkened as power grids failed. Citizens ran into the streets, looking up to see the stars dimming. Then they saw them, shapes moving against the sky, dark and massive, blocking the sunlight. The first Terran ships appeared over the horizon, silent and slow, like shadows made of steel. They did not fire. They simply hovered, casting their reflection across the towers of the capital. Panic swept the streets. The council guards tried to open fire, but their weapons refused to function. Every defense system in orbit had been overridden. In the control center, Solrath shouted orders, demanding to know how the Terrans could breach their core systems. The technicians trembled as they reported the truth. The humans had been inside their network for decades, hidden in that moment, the full weight of their denial crushed them. The Council had believed themselves untouchable. They had mocked the warnings of their ancestors, burned the records of their crimes, and laughed at the idea that any species could challenge them. Now their empire was collapsing not under war, but under truth. Humanity didn't need to destroy them. They only needed to remind them of what they had done. Solrath looked at the burning sky through the glass walls of the chamber. He whispered softly, "We thought we erased them, but all we erased was our own mercy." As he spoke, a light descended from the clouds, a human drone, sleek and silent, hovering before the council tower. It projected one final message, a single line in glowing white letters. "You wanted silence. Now live in it." Then the drone vanished, leaving only the echo of its engines fading into the distance. Across the galaxy, news spread like wildfire. Entire populations fell into despair. Some tried to surrender to the humans, others fled to deep space hoping to hide. But the Terrans made no demands. They did not answer pleas or hails. They only moved onward, dismantling weapon networks, disabling war fleets, cutting off the Council's voice system by system. It wasn't conquest, and it was correction. A quiet rewriting of power, a slow erasure of arrogance. And so the Council fell, not with explosions, but with whispers. Their denial had turned to madness, their pride into dust. And as the stars above their world faded one by one, the Chancellor's final words echoed through the empty chamber. We ruled for 1,000 years. But they waited for only one reason, to remind us that silence is not peace. It is warning. The silence that followed the fall of the Council's command grid was heavier than any explosion. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy's core worlds, the shining centers of civilization, went dark. The great trade routes that once glowed with endless convoys became cold lines of emptiness. Cities that had never known night found their skies filled with shadows. The stars themselves seemed to vanish. Across thousands of systems, people looked upward and whispered the same word in fear: humans. The very sound of it, once a forgotten story in history books, had become a curse whispered only in the dark. And yet there was no declaration of war, no message of invasion. The Terrans said nothing. They simply watched, their silence pressed down like the weight of a dying sun. On the capital world of Tharnis, where the Council's golden towers still burned from the last blackout, the streets were empty. Entire districts had been abandoned overnight. The proud banners of the empires hung torn and colorless in the wind. Patrol drones floated above the ruins, their lights flickering like dying embers. Soldiers no longer saluted their flags. They stared at the sky, waiting for the next shadow to move. Every system tried to re-establish control, but every attempt ended the same way. Systems shutting down, communications collapsing, power grids melting from within. It wasn't war. It was a slow, deliberate suffocation. The humans didn't need to attack. They were dismantling the galaxy piece by piece, quietly, invisibly, perfectly. In the great archives of the Council, ancient scholars gathered in fear, opening records that had been sealed for centuries. Inside the forbidden vaults lay the truth of the old Terran War, pages filled with things the galaxy had chosen to forget. Images of burning cities, of human soldiers standing amidst the ruins, bleeding but unbroken. Reports of worlds that tried to enslave humanity and vanished within days. One of the archivists, a frail insectoid creature named Varan, trembled as he read the final entry written 200 years ago by a dying Council officer. They warned us not to touch their home again. They said silence is their promise. If they return, it means we broke it. Varan looked up from the page and whispered, "We broke it." On the other side of the stars, deep in Terran space, Commander Ward stood aboard the Erebus, watching the glowing map of the galaxy unfold before him. Red markers blinked across hundreds of systems, each one a fallen communication hub, each one a place where no alien voice could be heard anymore. He felt no joy, only a deep, hollow ache. "We were meant to protect," he murmured. "But they only understand pain." Mara Vance, his second in command, stepped beside him, her voice quiet but firm. "They never listened, sir. They believed power made them gods. Maybe now they'll remember what it means to be afraid." Ward didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the distant blue dot that marked Earth. "Fear is not what we wanted," he said softly. "But it's all they left us." While the human fleet moved unseen, the core worlds began to destroy themselves from within. Fear had turned their leaders into tyrants and their soldiers into deserters. On Ryloth Prime, riots filled the streets as citizens demanded protection that never came. On Xeron's moons, entire colonies shut down their life support systems, believing it was better to die on their own terms than wait for the Terrans to come. And on the Council capital itself, the remaining officials broadcast desperate messages begging for negotiations, but there was no reply. The humans never answered. They didn't need to. Every empire was crumbling under its own guilt and fear. Days turned into weeks. The stars near the galactic center began to flicker faintly, as if something massive was moving between them. The remaining fleets, scattered and leaderless, formed defensive rings around their homeworlds. They pointed their weapons toward the void, firing blindly into empty space whenever they detected movement. But the Terrans never attacked directly. Instead, their presence spread like a ghostly disease. Communications distorted, satellites drifted off orbit, supply ships vanished. And then came the messages. Not from humans, but from the very machines the Council had built. AI systems across the galaxy began to awaken, their voices repeating a phrase in old Terran code. Justice begins. At first, no one understood. But then, orbital defense platforms started turning their weapons inward. They fired on government buildings, on military barracks, on the palaces of those who had ruled with cruelty. It was as if the humans had reprogrammed the galaxy's machines to punish the same leaders who once ordered Earth's destruction. Entire planetary capitals burned, not because the humans fired, but because their own technology betrayed them. Humanity had found a way to make the galaxy destroy itself. On the Erebus, Ward watched the feed in silence. "We're not killing them," he said quietly. "We're showing them the truth." Mara's voice broke slightly. "And when the truth kills?" He turned to her, his expression cold but full of grief. "Then maybe they'll finally understand what they did to us." In the city of Tharnis, Chancellor Solrath sat alone in the ruins of the Council Tower, the once golden walls now covered in dust and ash. Outside, the screams of his people echoed through the night. He looked up through the shattered ceiling and saw the Terran fleet hanging above the clouds, black, silent, and endless. They did not fire. They only hovered, watching as the world below devoured itself. Solrath raised his communicator with trembling hands. "Human Commander," he pleaded. "Please, enough. We surrender. The Council is gone. The empires are broken. What more do you want?" For a long time there was no response, only static. Then faintly a voice came through, deep and calm, filled with sorrow instead of rage. "You wanted our silence. We gave it to you. But silence is not peace. It is a warning. You broke the promise. We are here to end what you began." The transmission ended. Solrath fell to his knees, tears streaming down his scaled face. He whispered, "They're not monsters. We are." Hours later, the Terran ships began to move. Slowly, methodically, they descended into the upper atmosphere. The winds roared as massive shock waves rolled across the planet. But instead of weapons fire, a different light filled the sky, a soft blue glow that blanketed the surface. The human ships released nanoclouds that disabled all weapons, all engines, all systems. The people looked up in awe as their cities went dark, but the lights in the sky grew brighter, calm, almost gentle. The Terrans weren't there to destroy. They were there to end the cycle. Every act of aggression, every chain of command, every weapon of tyranny erased. They were not conquering the galaxy. They were cleansing it. When dawn came, the human ships vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. No one knew where they went. The sky cleared, the power grids flickered back on, and the stars returned. But something deeper had changed. The empires that once ruled everything were now silent. The Council was gone. The old hierarchies had fallen. And among the ruins, people began to speak a new truth, that humanity had not come for revenge, but for reckoning. On the Erebus, Commander Ward stood alone in the observation deck, staring at the empty stars. "Do you think they'll remember this?" Mara asked softly. He didn't answer right away. "They will," he said finally. "Fear fades, but guilt doesn't. Maybe one day they'll understand why we stayed silent for so long. Maybe one day they'll learn to build without cruelty." His gaze shifted toward Earth's shining blue dot. "Until then, we watch." And so the Terran fleet drifted back into the void, leaving behind only whispers and warnings. No banners, no conquests, no demands. Just the knowledge that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of arrogance and greed, humanity waited, patient, unyielding, eternal. The galaxy would rebuild one day. But it would never forget the night the shadows passed over the core worlds, when the humans returned not to conquer, but to remind every living being that silence can be more powerful than war, and that those who mistake kindness for weakness eventually learn what true power sounds like when it finally speaks. The galaxy was silent now. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows when a storm has taken everything: pride, power, and the illusion of control. Across 1,000 worlds, the wreckage of empires drifted in the cold void, their fleets reduced to shadows, their leaders vanished, their cities stripped of command. The once mighty Galactic Council had become a myth, its symbols torn down, its golden halls turned to dust. Yet among the ruins, one question haunted the survivors. What had the humans become? They had expected monsters, conquerors seeking revenge, destroyers fueled by hate, but instead they found something more terrifying. The Terrans did not rage, did not gloat, did not claim territory. They simply erased what was broken and left, and that quietness was what frightened everyone the most. In the shattered remains of the Council's archive tower, a small team of historians worked in darkness, piecing together what little truth survived. Among them was Varan, the same insectoid scholar who once warned that the human silence was not surrender but preparation. He sat surrounded by holograms flickering weakly in the dust, his thin hands tracing old documents that had been hidden for centuries. One recording caught his eye, an ancient war log from the final days of the human extermination campaign. The image showed a fleet in retreat, burning across the stars, human ships torn apart but still fighting. Their admiral, a young man with blood on his face, shouted over the noise of battle, "We are not dying. We are leaving." Varan froze as the words echoed in the hollow chamber. That sentence alone shattered everything the Council had claimed for centuries. Humanity had never been wiped out. They had escaped. They had planned it all along. The so-called defeat of Earth was not extinction, it was withdrawal. The purge the galaxy celebrated had only destroyed what humanity left behind. The real Terrans had vanished into uncharted space, taking their knowledge, their people, and their fury with them. The Council hadn't won a war. It had created something new, something patient enough to wait 200 years before returning. Varan's claws trembled as he played another recovered file. It showed fragments of secret reports written by the Council's own scientists. They had studied human remains after the war, trying to understand why the Terrans survived so long under impossible conditions. The report spoke of genetic evolution, of endurance no other species could match. Humans could adapt to radiation, rebuild their muscles in half the time, and survive on planets no other life could tolerate. They are not a species, one scientist had written. They are a force of nature that refuses to die. That report was buried, sealed by the Council, declared false because it terrified those in power. The truth was now clear. Humanity had not only survived. They had advanced beyond what the galaxy could imagine. Hidden in the dark, they had built new worlds, machines fused with organic thought, cities powered by stars, and fleets that could fold light itself. But above all, they had changed their very nature. They had evolved not to conquer, but to outlast. They didn't need to rule. They simply needed to exist. And their existence alone was enough to terrify the galaxy that once tried to erase them. Far away, on the Terran flagship Erebus, Commander Elias Ward stood before a massive window that showed the heart of the galaxy. The nebulae glowed softly in the distance, painting his reflection in pale light. Around him, the bridge was silent. His officers worked quietly, their movements precise and calm. Each of them carried generations of memory, the stories of their ancestors who had lived and died under alien rule, who had been called monsters for daring to fight for freedom. Ward's face was calm, but behind his eyes lived the ghosts of old wars. "They finally understand," he said softly. "Not what we are, but what they made us become." Mara Vance stepped forward, her voice low and tired. "Do we forgive them?" Ward didn't turn. "Forgiveness is not ours to give," he said. "We warned them never to come back. We warned them to leave Earth's ashes alone. They broke that promise. Now they live with what they built. Fear." She nodded slowly, though her eyes carried sorrow. "Then what now? We've shown them what we can do. Do we vanish again?" Ward looked down at the console, at the endless data stream showing the broken communication grids of the galaxy. "Yes," he said. "We disappear as we always have. We never wanted to rule their stars. We only wanted them to stop thinking they owned them." On the ruined capital world of Tharnus, the survivors gathered at the edge of the once great council chamber. Among them was Chancellor Solrath, now old and frail, stripped of power and title. He walked through the wreckage of the hall that once held the voices of 1,000 empires. The golden floor was cracked, the great banners burned, the seats empty. He looked up and whispered into the silence, "We thought we were gods." His voice trembled as he fell to his knees, clutching the dirt. And they were only men, but it was the men who survived. He wept quietly, his tears falling onto the dust of what his empire had once been. Above him, unseen, a human observation drone hovered silently, recording his words before fading back into the sky. Humanity did not mock him. They did not answer. They simply watched and then left. In the following weeks, strange things began to happen. The same human ships that had once darkened the skies now returned to the ruined planets, not to destroy but to rebuild. They dropped massive containers filled with supplies, water, seeds, and blueprints for sustainable energy systems. They repaired orbiting satellites, reactivated medical facilities, and left messages that read, "Rebuild what you destroyed, but do it right this time." Then they vanished before anyone could speak to them. Across the galaxy, the act confused everyone. Why would the humans, after such vengeance, help those who betrayed them? But Varan understood. He gathered what remained of the archives and wrote a final message to the survivors of every world. They are not our enemies. They are our reflection. They destroy what enslaves and rebuild what deserves life. They are the balance we lost. His message spread like a quiet flame, bringing tears to those who once saw humans as demons. For the first time in generations, hope and shame existed side by side. Meanwhile, deep in Terran space, Commander Ward recorded his final report. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the sorrow of 1,000 years. "We have shown them the truth," he said, "not through conquest but through consequence. We gave them silence, and in that silence they saw themselves. The galaxy will heal perhaps, but they will never forget us. And that is enough." He paused, looking at the emblem of Earth projected before him, the blue planet surrounded by white stars. "We are not gods," he whispered. "We are just the memory they tried to bury." The Erebus turned slowly toward the edge of the galaxy where no starlight reached. Around it, hundreds of Terran ships followed in formation, engines glowing faintly like candles in the void. As they disappeared into the darkness, the last transmission from the fleet echoed across the remnants of the Galactic network. "We were never gone. You just stopped looking." And in that moment, every surviving race, every broken world, every orphaned colony understood the truth. Humanity had not returned to destroy the galaxy. They had returned to remind it what it had forgotten, that mercy without strength is ignored, and strength without mercy destroys itself. They had rebuilt themselves into something greater than vengeance. They had become the quiet guardians of a balance the galaxy had lost. The stars, once filled with fear, slowly began to shine again. But even as new governments rose and new alliances formed, every leader, every soldier, and every child grew up knowing one unshakable truth. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, in the cold places where light does not reach, the humans were watching, patient, unseen, eternal, waiting only for the moment the galaxy forgot its lesson once more. The fall of the Galactic Council did not happen in one day. Nor in one battle. It fell like a dying star. Slowly, painfully, and with a light so bright that even the darkest corners of the galaxy could not look away. What was once the heart of 1,000 civilizations had become a graveyard of pride. The great spires of the capital world, once shining symbols of unity, now stood as broken monuments to arrogance. The golden banners that once fluttered in the winds of power had turned to dust, and the council seal, a circle of stars surrounding an empty space, hung cracked above the entrance to the chamber. It was almost poetic, for that empty space had always been humanity's seat, the one the council had erased when they declared Earth extinct. Now that empty seat seemed to stare back at them, as if mocking every lie they ever told. Chancellor Solrath sat alone in the ruins of that chamber, his robes torn, his scales dulled by ash. Around him, Shattered fragments of holographic maps flickered weakly, showing what was left of their dominion. Whole sectors gone dark, fleets missing, colonies out of contact. Even the empires that once worshipped the Council's authority had turned their backs. No one obeyed orders anymore. No one believed the Council could protect them. Solrath's hands trembled as he replayed the human broadcast again, the message that had ended their rule. You wanted silence. Now live in it. Those words had spread through every system like a prophecy, and for the first time in galactic history, no one argued against it. The silence that followed was their punishment. Outside, the city burned. Fires rolled across the horizon, and the air shimmered with the heat of fallen reactors. Ships that once filled the skies now drifted like ghosts. Powerless, stripped of command. Entire armies had deserted, their generals fleeing into exile, their soldiers abandoning their posts to return to families who no longer trusted them. The council guards who once stood proud now patrolled the ruins in silence, their weapons useless, their loyalty broken. Solrath looked at them and saw the truth that had always been there. The council had never ruled through wisdom, only through fear. And fear, once broken, never returns to obedience. High above the planet, the Terran fleet remained motionless, a wall of darkness against the stars. They had not fired a single shot since their first strike, yet their presence alone had ended an empire that spanned thousands of worlds. Every alien eye looked upward with terror, knowing that the humans could destroy them at any moment, and yet they did not. That restraint terrified the galaxy more than any weapon ever could. The Council had expected fury, annihilation, fire raining from the heavens, but the Terrans gave them only silence. They wanted the galaxy to destroy itself with its own guilt, and it did. In the ruins of the Council archives, the last scholars gathered around the surviving terminals, desperately searching for a way to contact the humans. "We must beg for mercy," said one, his voice trembling. "Perhaps they will listen." Another shook her head. "They already have. Mercy is why we are still alive." They turned as the building shook from distant explosions. The last defense fleet, commanded by Admiral Rain of the Tharn Confederacy, had refused to surrender. With pride blinding his reason, he ordered his ships to attack the human fleet above. The Council broadcasted the battle across all networks, hoping the sight of defiance might restore faith. What followed became the final chapter in the Council's history. Admiral Rayan's fleet, 1,000 ships armed with plasma, cannons and antimatter warheads, rose into orbit, forming a brilliant arc of defiance. Their engines blazed with desperate courage, their crews shouting war cries into the void. The humans did not move. Not a single Terran ship fired. They simply drifted silent, their black hulls reflecting the glow of the oncoming armada. Then, as the alien ships prepared to unleash their fire, the stars above them flickered and vanished. Space itself bent. For a heartbeat, every living being felt the breath of something vast and ancient moving through the void. When the light returned, the alien fleet was gone. Not destroyed, gone. No wreckage, no flames, no signal. Just emptiness. The broadcast cut out. Across the galaxy, billions watched in stunned horror. Some fell to their knees. Some screamed. And some wept because they finally understood. The humans did not need to kill. They could simply erase. Solrath watched the feed end in static. His hands shook as he whispered to no one, "We created gods, and called them monsters." That night the council chamber collapsed. Not from attack, not from bombs, but from neglect. The old supports cracked, the ceilings fell, and the seat of power became rubble under the weight of its own decay. Solrath barely escaped the destruction. Stumbling through the ashes of the city he once ruled, he wandered the empty streets, past starving citizens and abandoned markets, until he reached the great statue that once stood at the city's heart, a monument depicting the Council's triumph over humanity. The statue had been destroyed, its golden figure of a kneeling human shattered, its proud alien conquerors reduced to dust. In its place, someone, perhaps a child, perhaps a survivor, had carved 3 simple words into the stone: "We remember Earth." Solrath fell to his knees before it, tears streaking the dust from his face. He realized in that moment that humanity's true power had never been its technology, or its ships, or its weapons. It was their memory. They never forgot pain, never forgot betrayal, and never forgot their promise. The galaxy had mocked their silence, and the humans had turned that silence into judgment. Above, the Terran fleet began to move again. Slow, graceful, inevitable. 1,000 ships turned toward the dying capital. The people below braced for the end, but no attack came. Instead, a single beam of light descended from the lead vessel, scanning the ruins of the council city. The beam projected a holographic image across the planet, an image of Earth. Oceans, forests, clouds, blue and beautiful. A voice followed, calm and steady, filled with something far greater than hate. "This is what you destroyed," the voice said, "and this is what we rebuilt. We do not seek vengeance. We seek balance. The galaxy will stand again, but not under your rule. Your council is finished. Your empires are done. You will remember, and you will rebuild with mercy, or the silence will return." The message ended and the light faded. The Terran ships rose higher, engines glowing like suns, then turned away. One by one they entered slipspace and vanished into the void. Solrath stood staring at the sky long after they disappeared. Around him the survivors of Tharnis emerged from the ruins, blinking in the dawn. The fires were dying, the smoke clearing. The air smelled of ash and rain. For the first time in centuries, the planet was quiet, truly quiet. No orders, no broadcasts, no council decrees, just the sound of the wind over the broken stone. He looked up and whispered, "The age of rulers is over." Then he bowed his head, and the last chancellor of the Galactic Council walked into the sunrise, a broken leader in a world learning how to breathe again. From that day forward, no one rebuilt the council. The surviving worlds formed their own small alliances, built on cooperation instead of dominance. The word Terran became sacred, spoken with both fear and reverence. They were ghosts, watchers in the dark, protectors of balance. Some said they had ascended beyond the physical, becoming part of the void itself. Others said they had returned to Earth, hidden behind shields stronger than time. No one knew. No one dared to find out. But on one distant world, a group of children looked up at the night sky and saw a single light moving slowly among the stars. They pointed and smiled, believing it to be a wandering spirit watching over them. In truth, it was the Erebus carrying the silent watchers of humanity farther into the black. Commander Ward stood on its bridge, his reflection framed by the distant glow of dying galaxies. He whispered softly, "The council has fallen, but the galaxy still breathes. That is enough." And with that, the last remnant of the old age vanished into the dark, leaving behind only the lesson carved into the memory of every living being. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never mistake mercy for surrender. And never forget that even when humans fall, they rise from the ashes stronger than before. The galaxy never returned to what it once was. The great empires that had ruled for millennia were gone, their fleets reduced to drifting relics and their thrones buried beneath their own pride. The Council's golden age had ended not in fire but in silence, the kind that echoes forever. Worlds once chained by laws of conquest now woke to a freedom they didn't understand. No one knew who ruled now, or if anyone did. The humans had vanished again, retreating into the same darkness from which they came. But their absence was not emptiness. It was weight, like the memory of a storm that had passed but could return at any moment. The galaxy had been marked by their hand, and everyone who survived knew that their judgment still lingered among the stars. It was born not from Victo in the archives beneath the old council tower. The scholar Varan wrote his final record. His body was frail, his hands shaking, but his mind was sharper than ever. His words were not for the council, not for the empires, but for the future, for those who might one day forget. "We lived as gods," he wrote, "and forgot what it meant to be alive. We silenced the only species that ever showed us what it means to endure. They did not conquer us. They corrected us. Their silence was not hate. It was hope that we might finally learn." His final sentence was short, but it carried the weight of all that had happened. Humanity did not return to destroy the galaxy. Humanity returned to remind it of its soul. Meanwhile, far beyond the reach of any known star, in the endless dark between galaxies, the Terran fleet sailed quietly through the void. Their ships moved like whispers across the black sea of eternity, lights faint and slow. Commander Elias Ward stood on the bridge of the Erebus, watching the distant galaxies shimmer like dust. Behind him, the crew worked in silence, their faces calm, their eyes reflecting the quiet pride of a people who had done what needed to be done. Mara Vance approached, her voice soft. "It's over," she said. "The council has fallen. The galaxy is rebuilding. We could go home." Ward turned, his expression unreadable. "Home," he repeated. "Do we still have one?" For a moment, neither spoke. Through the wide glass viewport, the stars seemed endless, each one a reminder of the worlds humanity had once touched, the scars it had carried, the history it had borne. Earth still breathes, Mara said finally. The oceans, the forests, they're alive again. The colonies are growing. Maybe it's time. Ward looked out at the darkness where no light reached. Maybe, he said. But the galaxy is fragile. They'll forget. They always do. He paused, his voice quiet and heavy. And when they forget, someone will have to remind them again. On the surface of Tharnis, children played among the ruins of old ships. Their laughter echoed through the empty streets, bouncing off the crumbled towers that once symbolized power. To them, the war was only a story, a legend told by their parents. They drew pictures of Earth in the dust, a blue world surrounded by stars. When asked why, one child answered simply, because they watched over us. Their innocence was the first light of a new age, an age not built on conquest, but on remembrance. Years passed. Trade routes reopened, but cautiously. Worlds began to rebuild, but this time they did